A very good evening, my friends and fellow patriots, of course. Thank you very much for your company as ever. I'm Darren Grimes, for those that don't know. And before we get started, I want to say a little heartfelt thank you to those of you who support this little channel of ours. I've noticed that there has been an uptick in people actually supporting us via super chats on YouTube and via other mediums too. Every little really does help. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. We are just a little channel that we all do from our respective homes, and the work we put together doesn't come without controversy. You know, I've had threats myself. Others have been told that, you know, they won't be booked on certain channels for having certain views. It's not without risk, basically. So I genuinely appreciate every little bit of support that you guys offer us. So thank you. Now, of course, we don't have the backing of the BBC here, but we do pack a punch with common sense takes that would, well, almost certainly land us a non-crime hate incident in today's censorious Britain. And it's getting worse, my friends. Coming up on the show tonight, we're going to be diving into Suella Braverman's latest intervention, fresh from Trump's America. The former Home Secretary warned that the UK risks becoming the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. I'm turning myself up. Apparently, I was a bit too quiet. I've never been told that before. I'll tell you that for free. But Suella Braverman's warning there in the United States of America, she says the UK risks becoming the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. So I want to hear from you. Is she wrong to ask these questions? Or are we sleepwalking into disaster? We've got weak leadership, we've got mass migration, and there's a blatant failure of multiculturalism. So are we heading for an irreversible tipping point? And joining me tonight in a short while is to chew the fat and actually join me in a common sense crusade are none other than Alex Armstrong, who was, of course, a political commentator. He's on television more than the adverts these days. Connie Shaw, she is a proud feminist, someone that doesn't hold back in giving her views on the defence of biological sex and single-sex spaces. She's a free speech advocate too. Chloe Dobbs, well, need I say any more? Everyone that is watching this channel knows that she is a broadcasting supremo and the hero of recent UK. And later in the show, we're going to have Dr. Ralph Schoellhammer, who'll break down the Alternative for Deutschland surge in Germany. They're getting close, my friends, to polling at the top. They're getting very, very close. The CDU, Christian Democrats, they're on 27, AFD's on 24. Why is this happening? What does this mean for the future of Europe? Not just the future of Deutschland, but the future of Europe in general. We'll explore all of that with Dr. Ralph Schoellhammer, who is never one to pussyfoot and hold back. But before we get started, please do consider liking, sharing and commenting along. I'll get to some of your comments in a second. And as I said earlier, we're entirely fan-funded. Every little bit of your support allows us to keep growing. I can even turn my microphone up when I remember with your support. And we champion younger voices here on this channel who do want to stand up for British values. They do exist, my friends. Many of them are voting for Reform UK. We need to help them get there. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your support. Right, first up though, we're going to get to my digest. And, well, this week, the migrant mayhem, it's been off the charts. Let's go. How much more can Britain take of this migrant madness? We find out now that more than 50 relatives of asylum seekers are joining their fellow illegals in Britain every single day. Every single day. That's 19,154 in one single year. 19,000. And this is showing no signs of abating this problem. Labour aren't going to do anything. Not a damn. So this is going to continue getting worse and worse. Refugees from Syria from Eritrea, from Sudan, from Afghanistan. Afghanistan, by the way, and Pakistan, stats from Italy show that they are represented the highest in the crime rates of foreign nationals, because Italy, unlike Britain, has started documenting this stuff. But our spineless political class act as if this flood of unvetted arrivals is some sort of moral duty for the country that we all better get on board with. And meanwhile, the public, you, continue footing the bill. You're left in the dark about the real costs, the crime, and the chaos that follows. We're letting in people who we know next to nothing about, because as you well know, they're undocumented, they're fighting-age men from countries riddled with violence, with tribalism, and with anti-Western sentiment. It isn't just a case of bad policy, it's frankly national suicide, and it's playing out in real time on Britain's streets. So I wanted to give you a snapshot of just 1 week's carnage alone. I'm going to go through 3 cases that I've documented online that have had everyone from Suella Braverman to Richard Tice to a whole host of people commenting on via my X account, saying, why are we not deporting these people? And I imagine, my friends, you will share a very similar sentiment. I'm going to start in Newcastle, actually, a place that you'll probably be aware is very close to my heart, and a nurse in Newcastle. Apparently, the far right is the real problem in Britain. We're the land of opportunity for everyone other than law-abiding Brits, including nurses trying to get to and from work. This is the scene, my friends, in Newcastle. This is the car, a damage that was done to this nurse's car. And the little man that you can see in that mugshot there from a police station is an asylum seeker called Nasir al-Suwaimi. Now, we funded his education. We funded, of course, his prison stay after he fractured a nurse's spine whilst he was fleeing police in an uninsured car in Newcastle. Now, his excuse, and this is just from last week, by the way, that this has been reported, his excuse was that he didn't know you needed a driving licence to permit you to drive in Britain. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. If you believe that, you'll probably vote Labour, my friends. And Newcastle's MP, Chi Onwurah, well, did she come out and condemn the attack? Did she call for harsher penalties, more restrictions on migrants? Did she warn against the rise of the kind of lawlessness that we're seeing on our streets? No, instead she warns so often of the rise of the far right, this elusive bogeyman. Because obviously, that's the real threat here, my friends. And meanwhile, his victim, the nurse Claire, she had to hobble down the aisle. She was getting married weeks after this incident. And she had to walk down the aisle at the most important day of her life on crutches. She was so dosed up on painkillers that she can barely remember a thing. And it should have been the happiest day of her life. A honeymoon obviously ruined, her future changed perhaps forever, and yet the political class obsess over protecting migration's reputation as a pursuit, while ordinary Brits pay the price. Does anything, my friends, does anything at all highlight more clearly the sheer derangement of Britain's asylum and migration policies? And now we go to a Sudanese predator who won't be deported. This man's name is Ali Hamad, a Sudanese asylum seeker who spent months terrorising women in both London and Cardiff. This is a look of the lovely fella here. His crimes, my friends, include groping women in public, exposing himself on busy streets, masturbating in front of victims, and slapping a young woman in the face for daring to reject his advances, like some kind of primordial animal. And instead of swift deportation, he's not a British national, he was handed a pathetic 8-month sentence and a sexual harm prevention order that requires him to ask permission before being alone with women. Oh, well, that'll stop him, won't it? That'll stop him. Crisis averted. Sorted. We've fixed it. His solicitor insists that he arrived conviction-free, as if we're just supposed to take the word of a sexual predator at face value. The reality is this: he'll serve a pitiful sentence. Those 8 months won't be 8 months, it'll be half of that and then some. He'll get released early, he'll carry on offending, and because this is Britain, where even predators know the system is a total woke joke, it'll be absolutely scot-free. In case number 3, my friends, we go to Bournemouth now. If you're from Bournemouth, you'll know of this hotel. It's the Roundhouse Hotel, I believe. And this hotel has become quite infamous within Bournemouth for being a hub of migrant shenanigans. And Bournemouth itself has become a war zone. And I'm not joking. It was once known, regarded as a quintessential British seaside town, you know, complete with beaches, fish and chips. Now, what do you have to contend with? Well, you've got gang knife fights. Law-abiding Brits enjoying the promenade? Well, you've got to contend with Egyptians and Afghanis slashing each other with broken glass in the middle of the street. The ringleaders pictured here. Audie Hady was caught on CCTV hacking at people like a sort of possessed madman, and his accomplices weren't far behind him. The judge handed down a sentence of 3 years and 9 months. One of the other people involved, though, have walked free, and someone else rejected for asylum in the course of these events is still here, my friends. Apparently sofa surfing in mosques in Britain. Why is he not deported? Yet again, I'm asking that question. Why is he not deported? Because soft touch Britain means that if you have the right skin colour, if you are of the right migrant background, you can get away with any violent crime, no matter how heinous. You get refused asylum, you can still stay here anyway. Britain's soft touch madness absolutely has to end. These stories, they should all be national scandals. I think they would be if it were anybody else, but they barely make a dent in the news cycle. You may well not have heard of them because the people in charge, well, they don't care that asylum seekers are destroying communities. They don't care that British women are paying the price. They don't care that criminals are treated like victims in these scenarios. And all the while, 50 more arrive every single day, bringing more dependents, more benefit bill for you, more costs on public services that are squeezed like a pulp. We now have predictions of 72.5 million people here by 2031. My friends, the population of Australia is 25 million. Australia is a massive landmass. We are an island. This is bringing more chaos and tearing apart the very social fabric that our ancestors fought and died for. Britain is at breaking point. We need a total rethink of everything that's going on. We need mass deportations of the kind President Trump has already got stuck into. We need proper border controls. We need an asylum system that stops rewarding criminality. Britain deserves better. You at home deserve better. Your girls deserve better. It's time to wake up. That's just the start, my friends. I'm on one today. Stick with us, though, because up next we're going to break down Suella Braverman's warning about Britain's Islamist threat and the bombshell polling showing the rise of the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere, because it is time to enter the grotto. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, it would help if I was on the wrong camera. And we've lost Alex. Where on earth has Alex gone? Well, this is a good thing. He's on telly too much. This is the problem. Alex, where are you? There you are.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Right.
Darren, you're on the wrong screen. All we can see is you.
All you can see is me.
That was
and during your monologue, we couldn't see any of the pictures come up.
No, everyone else would have been able to see them. It's just on your
just
end, I
us.
think. Yes.
Oh.
That's good.
I
Oh,
don't know
you've
why
got me
that's happened
looking
for
at
you,
you rather
though.
than the broadcast. Okay. I thought all of the viewers would be confused that they couldn't see the pictures.
Well, I will check
To
with
me it
my
was funny
viewers.
you said here's a picture of this dodgy criminal, and then you changed camera and it was your face, and I was like, there's that dodgy criminal tearing
Oh,
crimes.
well, I very much hope they could see my pictures. In the comment section, they'll let me know if I've made a right mess, or whether or not you can see all my pictures.
Oh, apparently
and all the
they
rest of
can
it.
see me, but I can't see myself.
I
Yes.
can't see anybody. Yeah, I'm just moving my camera to see if it's me.
Aha, I've
can just-
changed.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Sorry
there we
about
go.
that.
Okay.
The software playing silly buggers, clearly. Silly buggers. Right, okay.
Apparently
I'm going to move into this camera. There we are. That's better. Now, they're saying they could all see my pictures, so that's very good news. Otherwise, I would have just been talking into the ether.
Well,
Now,
I'll never know what these criminals look like, but that's fine.
well, you can have a look. You can watch on replay. But on that point, though, about more than 50 relatives of asylum seekers arriving in Britain every single day, it's quite clear. Even you couldn't see the pictures, but you can hear the stories. That's 1 week of stories that I've picked up. Imagine how many others there are that don't go reported. It's a scandal.
50 by itself, when you talk about 50 per day, that doesn't sound like a huge number, but you times that by 365, that's over 18,000 a year. So when our small boat arrivals, Rishi Sunak got them down with that Albanian deal from 45,000 people a year to 30,000 people a year, right? When you then add another 18,000 on top of that, we're back to square one. It's no progress whatsoever.
I mean, Connie, do you feel remotely safe? I mean, all of these things, you'll be accused of racism and all these other things, but you are a champion of women's rights. So I'm wondering, do we have a problem here with the fact that, again, this is progressives turning a blind eye to what is at the harm of women?
Yes, I do think there is a problem with that. And as I've said before, disproportionate amount of my own unfortunate experiences with harassment and assault have been men from certain backgrounds, and them actually making it clear what their attitude is to me. I remember one man said to me, "You're beautiful, but you're disrespectful," because I wouldn't dance with him. And then he proceeded to flash us. And I reported that to the police, and they know where he lives because I found out I found who his neighbour was, and he goes to the University of Leeds and is a politics and international student, and he's a international student from Saudi. So there we go.
Right.
But one thing that we're talking about Suella Braverman is that I had no idea that 75% of people who are being tried for murder right now are of basically immigrant heritage.
Yeah. I mean, it is
I didn't know it was like that. I mean, when you look at sometimes the extremities of an issue kind of cast the lens that we should be looking at this through. If that is the most extreme end, then that sort of suggests that there is a trend going on. Obviously, we know there's a trend, but if that doesn't shock people into realization, I don't know what will.
Yeah, Alex?
Wouldn't that be great if we could cut down the number of murders to a quarter of the number that it is today, just if we didn't have immigration on the levels it's at?
Yeah, I just I don't think anyone's surprising. Like this stuff should be shocking to people. We should all be like reading this and gasping, but we've seen so much of it over the last 14 years particularly, but even in the last 30, let's say, it's been getting progressively worse. The British public are just desensitized to it all now. And that's the scary thing. For me, it's just, it's a never-ending part of the cycle of, nonsense that our governments push out to us, despite the fact we voted to lower immigration almost every single election. You can say the last one wasn't, but every single election before that, we've wanted to stop immigration going up and up and up, particularly illegal immigration.
Well,
But
even
again,
Labour said they wouldn't put it up, you know, so you can argue even that in that election there wasn't a mandate for the kind of things that we're seeing right now. But I just want to give viewers, because I mentioned those stats in Italy, but I didn't actually show the image of them. I don't know if you can see that clearly on your screens, but it goes through the data, and this is by a guy called Mark, Vanguard International on X, and it goes through the stats that Italy has compiled, and it's a total of 3.4 million suspects. And if you go through the list here, migrants from the EU 15 are 2 times more likely, but then you go through the rest of it, and the 3 main suspects are Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and of course, what's that? The likes of, I don't even know what those flags are, to be perfectly frank.
I can't see it from here.
But 10 times more likely. But they're all Muslim countries anyway. And you just see the extent to which Europe has allowed in a total poison that isn't doing it any favours whatsoever.
Well, it's the case that Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick and Nigel Farage and others have said, right? Which is not all cultures are equal. It's the sad truth. And it's not racist to say that, because the facts are pretty blunt. You know, the facts don't lie. You may not like them. You may think facts are racist or whatever you think. But the reality is that we have been importing people from cultures that are, you know, as Kemi Badenoch described it, peasant cultures that don't share our values. I think Connie gave an example saying Saudi Arabia is a peasant culture because there's parts of Saudi Arabia that are very, very wealthy. But clearly they see us as a soft touch compared to their own native countries. If that bloke had done what he did in Saudi Arabia, God imagines what they would have done to him in the justice system. They probably would have chopped his hands off or something. You know, this is the sort of stuff that isn't tolerated in those countries. But they come here and they go, "I'll get away with it here. Yeah, I might get a slap on the wrist from the police or a little notice, but that's about it." We're weak. We have become
weak. We are totally weak. We are lying back and taking it and thinking of England. You know, we are an international hooker at this point. We just lie there and take it, and I think it's shameful. I'm ashamed of what our country's become. I genuinely am. I think about the sacrifice that my grandfather made, and no doubt your ancestors too. And I just think, what was it for? And I don't want to think that about my own country, because it is somewhere that I love with all of my heart. But actually, speaking of Suella Braverman, you mentioned Suella Braverman. I want to play this clip that I picked up yesterday from the Heritage Foundation. Suella has been in the United States of America. She was there for Trump's inauguration. And she had some pretty, well, robust comments about the state of our country and what Britain could end up like. Have a quick listen to some of these remarks.
Mass migration is an existential threat to the way of life in our country and to Western civilization. And the public, be it in the US or in the UK, have voted time and time again to stop. However, there is some hope. The tide of this war has turned. As Churchill said, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. Perhaps it is the end of the beginning. Thanks to Trump, free speech, for all its faults, is in the ascendancy. The speed at which DEI and woke institutional policies are crumbling is accelerating, and the malfeasance of government and the mendacity of the administrative state are being exposed with frequent regularity. The prevailing consensus of how multiculturalism was nothing but a benefit is unraveling at pace along with many far-left ideologies. Progressive thinking is losing. It's losing with the young, it's losing with the old, it's losing with blue and white-collar workers alike, and instead is being forced to take cover in the liberal enclaves of Islington and San Francisco, where they weep at the fall of Justin Trudeau, Starmer's plummeting popularity, and the defeat of Kamala Harris. The re-election of Donald Trump by the American people heralds the potential that this war is winnable. Key questions will emerge. Will this inspire citizens in other nations stuck in this political ideology of the far left to follow suit? More importantly, what will happen in the West if it does not? What will happen if democracy is indeed thwarted by the existing political class? Vice President J.D. Vance said at the National Conservative Conference, at which I also spoke in the summer here in DC, that the UK was going to be the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. I don't think he was entirely joking. Is it an impossibility that 20 years from now, it will be the UK, not China or Russia, that will emerge as the greatest strategic threat to the USA, born out of a broken relationship and weak leadership? What happens if the UK falls into the hands of Muslim fundamentalism, our legal system gets substituted by Sharia law, and our nuclear capabilities vest in a regime not dissimilar to that of Iran today? Regardless of whether one thinks this is a realistic outcome, which I do not, should we not have the courage to ask these questions and look at where our country is heading? But now, thankfully, the tide is beginning to turn towards freedom. If the freedom revival fails in the USA, we all lose, and the loss would be irrevocable. Technology, digital IDs, controllable digital currencies, the absolute power of global institutions, all.
So she goes on there to talk about other issues that we were actually discussing last week, to be honest, about around the state surveillance and other ways that the state can control those who don't share the same political opinions as everybody else. But on the core substance there, I've quoted her here. She does say that that's not actually her view. She doesn't. All the press today have been saying, oh, dog whistle racism from Suella Braverman. But is she that wrong? We see in the United Kingdom today that there are several members of parliament who were elected on pro-Gaza tickets, who are there purely because of their stance on a foreign war, who stand up in parliament and defend cousin marriage, who are deeply pious in their Islamic faith, and I dare say some of them supportive of the tenets of Sharia law. So is it really that beyond thinking about that actually we could get to a point in Britain where there is clearly a strong political, within the Palace of Westminster, within the House of Commons, a strong political force that does have an Islamic bent?
I'm quite scared because I don't know if you saw GB News put out some figures, I think yesterday or the day before, on the number of seats that Labour is heavily reliant on the Muslim vote in, and could absolutely cost them a majority and make them lose the next general election. The way things are polling now, if they're not going to have a huge majority, Labour, if they did have a chance of winning the next general election, and if they were to lose, I think it was sort of 80 odd seats was the number they were talking about. That would be absolutely tragic for them. So I think the Labour Party, they're terrified of doing anything that's going to upset Muslims, but as a consequence, you may end up with these Islamist extremists on the rise, and that would be absolutely appalling. And I think the Labour Party refusing to do a national inquiry into the grooming gangs, I think that very much showed to me that they are very scared of being called Islamophobic. They're weak, and they really care about the Muslim vote.
Connie?
I think, obviously, and I am stating the obvious here, the issue of people not integrating obviously results in the situation we have now. So if you have people who are coming over from different countries, from Islamic countries, their families are then going to join them in the same area. So then, of course, people are going to be reliant on that vote and take that opportunity. So I don't know whether it's about necessarily getting rid of certain ideas and cultures entirely, but the issue is that with our voting system, it's going to be the case that when people of certain cultures all congregate together, then obviously people in those seats are going to take advantage of that. We saw that the case in in Leeds last year in the local elections, which I found, and I know everyone else did, extremely disturbing. Motin Ali, who won the Hare Hills council seat, and when he celebrated his victory, he said, "Allahu Akbar, this was for the people of Gaza." I mean, that was a local election.
Yeah.
He's meant to be fixing people's potholes and collecting bins and all the rest of it, yet he's campaigning on Gaza. And I even remember talking about this on student radio, and the response from a couple of the more liberals, I mean, they don't like to be called liberals because they think that's too right for them. You know, they said you wouldn't have any issue if if Jacob Rees-Mogg said something about Christianity if he won an election. And it's like people can't see past the issue here. You know, and like you were saying, it's just being completely blind to it. How can that not be concerning?
Yeah. Alex, I mean, that's a good point. I forgot about that councillor from Leeds for the Green Party. And that the rise of this stuff, I think it made its presence known at the last election over the issue of Gaza.
Yeah. I think Labour seem to be very scared of it, whatever it is, because they're not challenging them. Even when Jess Phillips, was being heckled and she shouted at the Islamist group that was trying to take her seat and almost took her seat, by the way, she refused to call it what it was. She just said they're misogynists, which, well, sure, is part of the problem, but it's not the root cause. I think the reality is that if we go back to our original question here about, could there be a hostile Islamic takeover of Britain? It is unlikely. However, you look at a country like Iran, and a lot of people who would be watching the stream would have probably remembered Iran before it fell into its current, Islamist regime. It was a liberal country. Women wore what they wanted. It was capitalist. It was, pretty much a free country. It was as free country as you can be in the Middle East. And a small group of radical Islamists took over that country. There were not a lot of them. They weren't a massive political force or anything. Just a small group of them. That small group now completely dominate that country and that region. That is the danger we have here. It's not that the whole country will turn to radical Islamism. It's a small grouping of people that become very powerful with a very large voice, and they become very powerful very quickly. And that's what we have to stop. And one of the things we don't have in this country is a constitution, or at least a written one that we can hold accountable. And I think we desperately need to build one, that we really do need to have some form of written constitution that outlines these are British values. This is what we will accept in our country. Anything against that will not be tolerated. Now, obviously, I don't want Keir Starmer or Labour writing that policy because we can see what they do. But I really think we need something. I really do.
Kick up the arse, probably.
I think if you allowed Labour to write a constitution saying what our values are, I would say we respect all trans rights and all faiths and all different genders.
Well, yeah, that's my concern.
It would be counterproductive.
Hopefully, if Reform do win the next election, that they could potentially write it, because I know it'll be the most patriotic and common sense minded constitution we'd ever have. And let's hope Nigel Farage might have one planned, because I think the one thing we forget about with the left is that once they get back into power, they legislate. That's one of the reasons why the Tories fell, because they didn't undo all the Blair era stuff. They kept on building on top of it. You need to wipe out so much stuff and then build right wing, conservative minded. It was a small c, not Tory, but small c minded policies that are hard to remove.
Connie, what were you going to say there?
I was going to say this issue when we talk about British values. I mean, it's often something that James O'Brien does, where he'll do call-ins on what British values are, and he'll basically get people he'll ask them what are British values, and then mock them when they can't really give a response. And it's like there's this idea that even to say that there is such a thing as having British values is in itself a sort of far right nationalist stance. And I think that's probably what you're right, Alex. Labour would be very reluctant to do anything like that, because to even say that there are such things as having certain national values is to position yourself in a way that seems intolerant. And that's what they're most scared of, is seeming like we're an intolerant country. But again, we're at this point where how far does tolerance go, when you're having to tolerate intolerance? And that's the issue that they have. But if you're having people like James O'Brien mock the idea of British values, I don't understand what people like what their point is. Like, surely it'd be a great thing to have British values. Like, can he not name a single British value?
No, he hates the idea of that.
Yeah.
He hates the idea that these people love the thought that we are some valueless country. In fact, they perpetuate the idea that Britain doesn't have a culture, that British people don't have values. Well, we do. We have plenty of them, but the reality is they're being eradicated quicker than we can possibly retain them. I mean, churches being burnt down at a rapid rate, pubs being closed. We've got culture up to our eyeballs in this country. We've Shakespeare, for Christ, crying out loud, monarchy. I can sit here all day talking about British culture, but anyway, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean that question. I mean, it's used by people like James O'Brien, who are what I would call gotcha journalists who, rather than actually asking meaningful questions to have an interesting debate, they just ask questions that are trying to trip people up and help try to get them get their knickers in a twist. But it doesn't lead to any proper debate, or it's not interesting for me as a viewer, at least.
I actually called into James O'Brien yesterday, and he was asking the question, is, in the light of David Coates coming out as gay, he was asking the two questions: is homophobia worse today than it was in 2015? And is homophobia still a bad thing in football? And I rang up straight away, and I got straight through to the assistant producer, and I said, it's interesting that James picked 2015 because that's when Stonewall added the T to the LGB. I was trying to explain to the producer what I meant, and she kept saying, so you're saying that because of the acceptance of trans people that there's now more homophobia? And she clearly thought that I had quite a backwards view. And I was also answering her second question. My brother's been in academy football his whole life and experiences homophobia all the time. And she ended up saying, look, if we can get you on, I'll call you back. And it's like, you never hear these conversations.
I mean, you're right, though. You're right. The addition of the T, because it makes us all look like complete fruitcakes.
Yeah, I'm annoyed at myself that I said that. I should have just said the football thing and then gone on air and said it, because the reality is James O'Brien is not going to accept calls from people that he's going to find challenging.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And that's the issue with him.
Right, okay. I've got Dr. Ralph there waiting patiently. Dr. Ralph Schoellhammer, who is a great man, and he is on GB News quite often. He writes for Unheard and other publications, as well as academic work, very serious stuff, not like us. So we'll get to Ralph, and I'll try and bring you guys in this conversation, because we have indeed got Ralph live. He's given up some of his time, which is very nice of him. But let's get to it in the hot seat. Why does this always happen? I click the button and nothing happens. Well, joining me to discuss is... Oh, it's gone on the wrong camera. Hang on. Where am I? Where am I? I'm here. Right. Of course, Dr. Ralph is waiting very patiently for me to get through tonight's tech issues. I'm not normally this incompetent, am I? For some reason, my overlay has gone walkies. I'll click on this lovely 5 box and we'll get Ralph straight up once my show stops being derailed by tech gremlins. Where is Ralph? There he is. Ralph, thank you very much for joining me, my friend. Sorry about that. Some little gremlins getting us down. How are you, my friend?
You were just building up the excitement. Very well done.
I was. It's Ralph. Come on. I want Ralph. Listen, where are you right now, by the way, geographically, I mean?
Vienna.
In Vienna. Are you of the view that next door, pretty close by, there's a political earthquake gonna take place? Because if we look at the poll that I've got on my screen right here, we can see that the Alternative for Deutschland on 23%, up 4 points, and the CDU on 29, the ruling SPD, down to 15%. This is nothing short of a political revolution, isn't it?
If the actual election should reflect these polls, then yes, I think the answer is quite clearly as you described it, and my hopes are high. I think it is necessary. Germany is in a similar situation as the United Kingdom, But the Germans are lucky enough to have elections already this February, and they don't have to wait, I think, for another 4 years as you have in the United Kingdom. So hopefully this can actually be a change in the general trend. I mean, Elon Musk, for whatever you think of him, he was not wrong when he said that only the AfD can save Germany. That doesn't mean that they have to rule alone, but they should be part of a future coalition government. I think this would be an act of political hygiene that would be necessary in Germany today.
Yeah, because the reasons for this happening, I don't think you have to be as learned as you are, Ralph, because the fact of the matter is, during this election period alone, in isolation, we've seen the kinds of terror attacks that are enough to make a nation sit up and take notice. We have just a few examples that I've got on screen here now. This asylum seeker confessed that he slit the throat of a CDU politician, and this is from News in Germany, and they're a great publication, and he's from, he's a Guinean. Now, he came to Germany in 2016, no previous convictions, but went on to slit the throat of a politician. In this example, the Alternative for Deutschland, with the votes of the FDP, have actually pushed forward a migration proposition within the parliamentary chamber in the Bundestag, and 2 motions passed on migration. So you think, okay, they're getting things done. Why do they need to get things done? Well, look no further than this horrible story that was reported even in this country, where Afghan stabbed a child 8 times. This beautiful little boy, a 2-year-old called Yanis. This was reported by Bild, and a man that courageously intervened paid for his efforts with his life. Another child, 2, and a pensioner, 72, were also seriously injured by knife wounds. The Afghani couldn't read. He was here, welcomed, of course, as many Afghans were, but before that there were plenty of Syrians came over and all these other issues. I mean, you see my point, Ralph. You don't have to be a political Nostradamus to see that the writing was on the wall for the mainstream parties in Germany.
No, and I would go a step further to bring in a little bit the British experience. If you think about somebody, I know he's, not in every circle is it popular to quote him, but in many ways, I think Enoch Powell in the UK made predictions that were quite close to the mark. We had authors in France who in the late 80s said that migration is going to be a problem. We had a referendum in Austria in the early 1990s that was called Austria First. So ironically, before Donald Trump had America First, we Austrians were a few years ahead of him, that talked almost explicitly about the problems of mass migration. And that was in 1993. So you're absolutely right. You don't have to be an academic. You don't have to be a journalist or a politician to understand that. I would argue since the mid-1980s, migration has started to go wrong. Right? It was then supercharged into the wrong direction in the 90s in the United Kingdom under Tony Blair, and then again in the early 2000s, particularly in Germany in 2015. But the trend was already there. And I was listening quite interested in the conversation you and the rest of the panel had before. And I think we have to face the fact that for a significant part on the left, and this was also not the case in Germany with this vote in the Bundestag, where the Greens and the SPD did not vote to, for example, restrict illegal, that's the point, right? They didn't even vote for a restriction on illegal immigration to the country. And to quote Donald Trump, who recently said, well, people who want illegal immigration, they either must be stupid or they hate their own country. I guess in reality, it's a mixture of both. But particularly the part of hating one's own country, that is part and parcel of left-wing ideology. And I think we have to understand this. They very often present it as kind of a benevolent compassion. You mentioned the issue about Gaza, for example, but there's the same thing. These people don't care about Gaza because they care about the people there. They care about Gaza because it's another cudgel they can swing against, what you want to call it, patriots or nationalists or whatever the term is you want to use. And I think that's important to keep in mind. The reason why you have queers for Palestine, is because a significant part of the LGBTQ movement, particularly the T, has also drank very heavily from the anti-nationalist, anti-patriotic well. And this is what then expresses itself in what appears to be ridiculous political positions. But from the perspective of them being anti-nationalist movements, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, it's insane, though, right? It's not rational to be supportive of people that hate you. That's just a bizarre. It just does not make sense. If you are a rational actor, why would you support these people? But this is happening throughout the West, isn't it?
Well, I would say I agree with you. I see it as you do, and so I would also consider it to be irrational. But if you hate yourself, and somebody else says, you know what, I hate you too, it all of a sudden appears quite rational. And by the way, this was the position you had already in the late 1960s. Think about these early left-wing movements. A lot of this, of course, was also supported by Marxist movements that were financed by the Soviet Union. But many of those ideas stuck around. Like the idea, the old joke, right, where the American guy says to the Soviet guy, in my country, I can criticize my president. And the Soviet guy says, yes, in Russia too, we can criticize your president. That's very similar to what we see currently happening. There is an alignment between the external forces who hate the West and, for lack of a better term, a kind of fifth column we have within our own countries and within our own nations. I know these are harsh words, but if you look at the political decision-making, if you look at the policies, whether it's Keir Starmer in the UK or what happened under the traffic light coalition in Germany, I think it's very hard to deny. Again, as Trump said, either these people are stupid, and I don't think that all of them are that stupid, or they hate their own country, which seems a more enlightening answer, if you ask me.
Yeah, Ralph, I just read a piece by you about the Green New Deal, not the American one, to be clear, the European Union's one, because they copied it from, I can't remember if they copied it from President Biden or whether the EU came up with it first. But anyway, this Green New Deal that they're positing, and they're still putting this forward. How much has energy policy, so there are two questions there. One, why is the EU still doing this when they've realised the lessons from Germany? It's very relevant to Germany, given that Germany decided under Angela Merkel that Russian reliance on Russian gas was more important than keeping its nuclear resilience. And secondly, why is the EU as a whole still determined to go hell for leather on this when it's quite clear to me that the German population are looking at their energy policy and thinking that it's nuttier than a fruitcake?
Well, because it's part and parcel of what we also talked before. As I said, the migration policy in West, I think that's an important distinction we have to make. In Western Europe, things are quite different once you are east of Germany and east of Austria. So in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, things are seen differently. But in Western Europe, and I would include the UK in this, if I may, very much to the chagrin of the Brexiteers among your viewers and listeners, I'm sure, but just for the sake of the argument, I go there. The idea was that from energy policy to migration, the main goal of the modern government in the West was, I'm slightly exaggerating, to atone for supposed sins of the past. The entire climate change debate, the entire energy transition debate, look at the way in which it is very often framed, is this idea that, well, human beings are a plight on the planet, and particular Western, or sometimes it has also a racial undertone, white people are a plight on the planet. So they have to forego the, prosperity, they have to forego the standards of living they get used to. This is a religious sentiment, not a scientific one. And this is where I believe that the right very often makes a mistake, or energy proponents like myself and you, right, make mistakes when we try to have a rational argument. Yes. The Greens in Germany don't want to tear down nuclear power plants because they think it's good for the environment. They want to tear down nuclear power plants because it's driven by an ideology. And I think this is something we have to keep in mind. And the same, I would argue, is at least partially true in the United Kingdom. I think the same is true in parts of the United States, like in California. And the same was true in France and other areas of Europe. This is an ideological/cultural battle. And to connect it to the conversation you had before with your panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them, of course, as well.
Yeah.
If you no longer have traditional patriotism or traditional nationalism, or whatever you want to call it, I consider myself a nationalist, but I'm happy to soften it down and call it patriotism. You have a gaping hole in your heart, if you will, where these sentiments, these feelings are supposed to be, and you will long for something to fill it. Now, what we see happening is in the West that you had all these ersatz religions, all these ersatz sentiments that try to replace what once was filled by, pride in your tradition, in your culture, in your values, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's the energy transition, or whether it's mass migration. These are all attempts by a postmodern, spiritually empty society to refill that gaping hole. Now, that's a problem for you and I. Of course, people that come to the UK, that come to Germany, that have spiritually, and I use this term again quite carefully, strong belief systems from the places they came from, they are not going to give them up because they say, why should I replace whether it's my Muslim faith or something else for this weird, postmodern nonsense that you guys believe in the West? And we have actually quite good evidence that this is the case, because very often it's second and third generation immigrants who are less well integrated than their parents and grandparents. And the reason for this is, if you came from Pakistan to the United Kingdom in the 1950s, well, first of all, there's a great chance that a Pakistani child got a similar education in Pakistan than a child got in the UK. But you came to a country that had pride in itself, that had self-esteem, that was walking, with shoulders back and a straightened back. This is something you want to integrate in because it's impressive. It radiates strength. We no longer do this. And so this is one of the reasons why nobody wants to integrate, because we don't offer them anything to integrate. And again, a longer topic, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, so on those points there then, if Germany was to, and the election's coming up next month, if Germany was to actually go big for the AfD, what would this mean for the European Union?
Well, I think the European Union has to decide, and especially the bureaucracy in Brussels has to decide what they want the European Union to be. And I think one proposal, and this might be something that would also be, again, interesting for the United Kingdom, if we say, okay, this is a union of sovereign national states, right, of sovereign nation states. They understand that due to their size, they have to cooperate where it makes sense, but they also have the right to go it on their own where they believe that they differ. For example, in things, as we talked before, right, in energy policy, in gender policy, in education policy. But at the moment, in many instances, the European Union is behaving like an empire. Right? The idea is that you have to impose a uniform set of standards and values on countries that don't share them. And this has always been the strength of Europe, once again, including the United Kingdom, that there was
diversity,
a shared understanding,
so to speak.
Yeah, but a beautiful diversity.
Yes,
there was an understanding that the British are unique in their own way, just as the Austrians and the Germans are unique in their own way. We understood that we have a certain shared past, right? Certain shared cultural values, whether it's Christianity, whether it's, the Roman heritage, but we also understood that there are differences, which is the very reason why there are different nation states. There is nothing wrong with saying that, Denmark should belong to the Danish, Britain should belong to the British, and Germany should belong to the Germans. This is neither racism, this is nothing of the kind. We live in a world that is made up of nation states. But that must be more than just a designation on a map, right? It means that these states are actually filled with members of the nation, both in name, in passport, but also in sentiment, in loyalty. And this is a little bit the problem I saw also in the conversation you had before. If a significant part, just the last one point, if a significant part of the British people do not feel both emotionally and no, I think emotion is actually the right word. When we say, what are British values? Or why could I never become British 100%? Because I admire Shakespeare, I admire many things that the British culture and heritage has given to the world. But I don't get goosebumps when I think of it because it's not my history. When I think about the Habsburgs, right, I feel almost elevated because I say, this is the history of my people. It makes me proud. And I think in the same way, and I think you guys should, right, is when British people look back at their history. But this kind of feeling has been replaced with shame. We no longer feel pride when we look at our history. What we feel is shame. And if you are ashamed of your history, it's only a small step to be ashamed of your values as well. And this needs to be reversed. There would be no point in writing up a British constitution that has wonderful points in it, what is supposed to be, to be British and what those values are. People need to not just believe in them, they must feel them. There must be, being British must feel with a certain positive sensation. And this is, as I said, I'm a nationalist. I have that kind of feeling when I think about my country. And I hope that you guys have the same.
Yes, that's beautifully put, actually, Ralph. And you were clearly listening. So 10 out of 10 for doing your homework, because you really did listen to the conversation that we had. But I'm going to bring in that panel now, who are all sat scrolling through. Alex is on some dating app or something. But we're going to bring them in now, and we'll see what they had thought of what you had to say, which I thought was brilliant. Where are we? Oh, are we here? We're here. Hello. Right, I had to build
Thanks
that
for joining
in real
us, Ralph.
time.
Good to see you again.
Good
Yeah.
to see you.
Now, Ralph had to say there about, I think we all feel like that about Britain. I mean, Connie, I don't know if you do. That's not meant as an attack on you, Connie, at all. But do you feel that about, I do, when I see a video, like yesterday I posted a video of old Britain, and it brings out, I feel goosebumps. I just feel so incredibly proud to be from this country that actually I want other people to feel that way. And I can't understand why other people don't. You know, we have given the world so very much. Does that make me a sort of swivel-eyed nationalist? Am I uncool with the kids? What do you make of what Ralph was saying there?
I agree with you, Darren, and I feel the same. I remember growing up, and even my mum reminded me like how lucky you are to be from this country. And, you know, out of all the places I could have been born, I was born in the UK. But even what you were saying, Ralph, hearing you say that makes me kind of feel slightly uncomfortable. Not because I disagree with you. I do agree with you that people should feel pride in the country that they're from. But I think it is this kind of, obviously the people that I spend my time around are students. I feel it's like this sort of internalized guilt that to feel proud of your country is something that you should feel guilty about. But I even remember at primary school, it must have been the 2015 election, we did a mock election and we were placed into, randomly we were placed into the different parties, and I was put in the UKIP party, and we actually won the mock election. And there were children voting for us, and we were just saying things that UKIP said about being a sovereign, independent nation, being proud of our country. But, you know, when those children grow up and they realise, oh, actually, no, maybe we shouldn't be proud to be British. Britain has done awful things. It should be a natural thing to feel proud of your country. And I do feel like that. But at the same time, it's kind of like that, it's kind of sometimes, it's not because I actually am uncomfortable, but I almost feel uncomfortable hearing it. And I don't know if that's because I'm so used to hearing that it's a bad thing to be a nationalist.
Yeah, it's like we've all been brainwashed, conditioned.
Yes, we have.
Go on, Connie. You've reminded me, Connie, of the 2015 school mock elections that I had back then. I remember I ran as a Tory intentionally, not because I was put there, and we were allowed to put posters up around the school. And I remember some girl went running through the corridors, crying her eyes out, tearing down all my posters, saying that the Tories are murderers.
I mean,
sorry, go on, Ralph. Continue.
Yes,
what you were
Ralph,
saying.
go on. What were you going to say there?
No, I agree. And this is, we often have conversations about what culture actually is. And I think, Connie, you described it beautifully, because that is how culture really works. It is that we have an intuitive reaction to something that we cannot explain. And I think in the past, the intuitive reaction, for example, to one's heritage, to one's culture, to one's tradition was a positive one. And in the West, I don't think that the term brainwashed is an exaggeration, or we have been, let's call it, marinated and socialized to look at this differently. And by the way, because people then say, oh, Ralph, this is on the brink of xenophobia or something. I don't think that's the case. I give you another example, a real quick one that I find is always very appropriate. I believe that my mother is the best mother in the world. Right? I'm absolutely convinced of that. But it's pure coincidence that I was born to her as her being my mother. And me loving her does not mean that I have to hate anybody else's mother in this group. Actually, ironically, me loving my mother makes me understand you guys loving your mothers even better. And I think the same is true about healthy patriotism. Loving my country actually lets me understand why somebody else loves their country as well. I would even go so far and say that the right in this respect understands the Indians, the Chinese, even certain parts of the Middle East much better than the left, because we can relate to that sentiment in a way that the left can, right? Because the left believes, some of them at least, in this kind of idea of of a postmodern, post-nationalist world where people no longer have loyalties to things that are older than themselves. And the problem with that is, last point, because I think that's also crucial, and people can see and feel this in Britain, Germany, and Austria, and I think that's one of the main reasons for the rightward shift. If you no longer see yourself as a link in a long chain over time, then if we say that chain is our country, right, is our history, then you also no longer have the responsibility to take care of it. And that also reflects itself in architecture, in the streets, in the maintenance of buildings. Because if it's not part of a long tradition, a long history that is worthwhile prolonging and sustaining, you no longer care about it. And this is why everything appears to crumble. This is why we no longer appear to have beautiful architecture. Because who cares about it, right? I mean, if people die, nobody's going to look back at it anyways. And I think that in the 19th century and other historical parts, people looked at this differently. At least that's my point about this.
Yeah, that very well. I thought that was very well put, actually. I hadn't thought of it like that with the mother analogy. Alex, what thoughts have you got on what you've heard so far?
Well, I kind of want to focus on the political implications a little bit, because looking at the AfD, this poll up on the screen here, the CDU who are on 29% there too, and we're seeing a sort of similar situation happening here in the UK with Reform, the Conservative Party, sort of neck and neck, or some sort of 3-horse race, you could say. My concern is this, Ralph, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. My concern is that it seems like the more nationalist parties, or let's say the nationalist parties, the outliers of the political community, are going to have to get into bed with established political parties that have caused, in quite many cases, including the Conservative Party here in this country, have been the root cause of the problem for a very long time. And we know, traditionally speaking, that minority parties are punished by the electorate for failing to deliver on their promises. Do you foresee a sort of an establishment stitch-up, so to speak, where the public sort of breathe a sense of relief they've got what they voted for, but nothing actually changes because they don't want it to? The only place I think this will happen is in America, because they've got one two-party system, which kind of works in their favor in this point of time. But is this going to really sort of finish off Europe if we can't get these outlier parties into government by themselves?
I think that's an excellent question. I think you're absolutely right. And the current constellation in Germany, I would say the AfD being in government is highly unlikely. I think we have to wait for another 4 years. But if the trend that we saw in Austria, where now the once fringe right-wing party, the Freedom Party, is now the strongest party in parliament, I could imagine something similar happening in Germany as well. Again, I fully agree with your assessment. Given the electoral system, each of these parties voting on their own is highly unlikely. But on the other hand, if you look at a country like Hungary, right, Fidesz did get over 50% of the vote. So if things get bad enough, it is possible to happen. But you're right, this is always a little bit the problem compared with the United States. In the US, you have the advantage, you win the presidential election, you have a majority in Congress, you can affect much more change than if you have to rule in one way or another in a government coalition. I think you're absolutely right. But the trend, and you guys are a good example for this. If I listen to the conversations you have on Reason all the time, you show that, especially, I know I don't look like it due to my youthful looks and the great lighting in my room, but you guys are the future. You're much younger than I am, and if I hear you guys talking, I can tell, okay, the next generation is moving into a very interesting direction. And again, I'm old school, so I use the term nationalism, but whether we call it nationalism or enlightened patriotism, or I'm very open for which terms we actually want to use when we debate those things. But a sense that, wait a moment, what contemporary, let's say, postmodern ideas have, and I know this is also an overused term, I just don't have another one at the moment. What contemporary postmodern ideas are offering to us, hearing what you guys are saying, it's no longer satisfying. Right? It seems you don't say, well, this is great. Even progressivism doesn't appear as progressive anymore as it might, again, as it might was cool in the 70s and 80s. I'm not even denying that. But I think now it almost seems the exact opposite.
Ralph, sorry, Chloe, sorry, I'll come straight back to you. But before I forget this question, because I've got a memory like a goldfish. Ralph, what I was going to say was, Nigel Farage was asked today on ITV, a big national, of course, broadcaster, and they asked him about the alternative for Deutschland came up in conversation in what's going on in Germany, and the comparisons between Reform and the AfD. Now, I get the impression, I haven't had conversations with him to this effect, that he would not want the comparison between the AfD and the Reform Party. What are the meaningful differences between the two parties? Because there are those in Britain who would say that the AfD is a neo-Nazi party.
Well, I think there are a few points here, and I try to make them as quick as I can. Well, the first one is it's not a neo-Nazi party because that's illegal in Germany. I mean, they have tried to outlaw the party. They failed because it's not a neo-Nazi party. And I heard on CNN recently that the AfD is embracing its Nazi heritage. That's absurd. The party was founded in 2008 as a reaction to the Euro crisis. So there have been more Nazis in the 50s and 60s in the traditional mainstream German parties than there are in the AfD. Now, again, every party has a lunatic fringe. Every party. The Republicans have a lunatic fringe. The Democrats have a lunatic fringe. The Greens have a lunatic fringe. Although I would say, in the case of the Greens, it's not just a fringe, but that's a personal opinion. And yeah, the AfD has a lunatic fringe. But if you listen to how, for example, the party leader Alice Weidel is speaking, she calls the party. She did it twice in a conversation with Elon Musk and in an interview with Bloomberg. She even denies that they are a right-wing party. She says they are a conservative libertarian party.
Yes.
Again, I would disagree with that, but fair enough. Her vice chair, Timo Kupala, recently gave a long interview where he said, and of course, when we talk about Germans, we also mean the Germans who have a migrant background, but who want to see Germany prosper. So, but as with Donald Trump, right, the AfD can say whatever it wants, and then there's what the media wants to hear, and they're going to run with it anyways, even though they say something completely different. Nigel Farage is an interesting case. On the one hand, he's very charismatic. He's a good speaker. He's a good debater. I like that about him. But on the other hand, as you guys, I think, so correctly and eloquently pointed out, this is not just a struggle for Germany or the UK. This is something that affects all of the West.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel that Nigel tries to bring too much distance between him and other parties that might be slightly different, that they might be more radical in some areas and less radical in other areas. But overall, they share the same goal. And he always seems to be very quick about distancing himself. He was distancing himself from Marine Le Pen. He's now distancing himself from the AfD. He has been distancing himself from the Freedom Party. And I'm sorry, if you want to save Western civilization, you can't do it on your own. And by the way, I'm being facetious here, so I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. He's increasingly also distancing himself from former members of his own party. And he lost a couple of people who I personally, like Ben Habib, I found these people quite impressive. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I wonder, is it really about civilization and the West, or is it more about Nigel Farage?
Well, I really like Ben Habib, but I would argue that actually Ben has, when Ben lost his ability to be deputy leader of the party, it starts to look like a case of sour grapes. Now, I'm not necessarily even saying that it is, but it certainly looks like that from an outsider perspective. So I'm not sure that Ben's criticisms are landing as well as they potentially ought to be, because maybe some of them are justifiable. The democratization of the political party, for example, and other issues like that. Fine, these are all laudable criticisms to hold and have, but it just looks like a case of he didn't get what he wanted, so now he's throwing his toys out of the pram.
No, I think that's true, right? As I said, this is, I think there are many angles to look at it, but there is, even within, I would say, the British movements, and again the younger British generation, I think, for example, about the Lotus Eaters and Connor Tomlinson, so all people that we know, they seem to be increasingly disillusioned, for example, with Nigel Farage. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that I share this in its entirety, and I'm not British, so I know I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but again, it was a pattern with Farage that you don't have to completely. He doesn't have to align himself with non-British movements that share his goals. But with this immediate desire to distance himself, I find odd. And I don't know if there would be, you guys tell me, what do you think? If there would be Prime Minister Nigel Farage, do you think that he would be as effective and dedicated to change in the way that Donald Trump is right now in the United States? It's a serious question. I don't know.
I mean, I think that
I
I think that he's very determined, and I don't think he's going to, give in to pressure from leftists and whatnot to do the politically correct thing. He is a man who will say what he thinks, and he does not care. But I think that there definitely is a concern that the Reform Party is very much the Nigel Farage show. And when he became leader of the party, that gave them a huge uptick in support, and they definitely would not have got the number of votes that they did at the general election if it weren't for Nigel coming on board. He's a very powerful figure, just like how Boris Johnson's great personality allowed the Tories to win a big majority in 2019. But for the party to last in the long run, and for it to be in a position where it actually could govern the country if they were able to win the next general election, they do need to organise themselves and sort themselves out, and make sure that, if Nigel only leads the party for the next 5 years, that when Nigel eventually steps away in 5 or 10 years' time, that the party doesn't fall apart without him. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, no, good points.
Go ahead. Because you asked about the comparison between Reform and the AfD in Germany. One of the things that I find makes the AfD so interesting is, I don't know how many of you had to listen to the conversation Alice Weidel had with Elon Musk, but the fascinating thing is, she's a completely uncharismatic individual.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be rude, but I just assumed that that was just being from Germany.
No, you're right. If I would be super cynical, I would say that the great tragedy of 20th century history is that when the charismatic Austrian Germans move to Germany and start politics, then all of a sudden all the Germans fall in line because they're not used to a charismatic leader. So I don't think you're entirely wrong there. But that's I think the point. The AfD, even if Alice Weidel would disappear, I would argue that the AfD would still stick around, because it is not the charisma of the current leadership that holds it together. Now,
yes,
I think she's very smart. I think that's, and even the leadership of the party, because one of the things that they do, and that is also correct from the point of the critics of the AfD, there is a more radical and a moderate wing, but somehow she's able to balance those two out. And it is somewhat ironic. I mean, Elon Musk said it in the op-ed he wrote for a German newspaper, and there are many things that disagree with Elon Musk about, but in this point, he's quite correct when he says, well, are we really saying that the German party that is led by a lesbian woman that is married to a woman from the Philippines and has, I think, 2 adopted children is the new Hitler? And I mean, that's a fair question.
Yeah. It is.
I mean, lesbians as the new Nazis. I'm sure there is a great movie in that, but in reality, I'm not convinced.
But they would, yes, Eva Braun has a new role to play. But they argue, do they not, that she's not a real homosexual, as in she's not the right kind of homosexual. So therefore, it's irrelevant what her sexuality is.
So you mean like blacks who vote for Donald Trump are not really
real
blacks?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's it. In essence, that is a totally what it is. Listen, Ralph, I could talk to you all day, but before we let you go away, we've got to wait for. You mentioned there the AfD will have to wait 4 years. Obviously, the German electoral system is different from our own. The idea of coalitions and coalition building. Does Britain have to get used to being more European in that regard? Because it does seem that political affiliation on a party level, it has died a death in Britain.
Well, I think Britain would always be different from continental Europe in many ways, and I think that's good. The British are unique, and I mean this as a compliment. But of course, some things are similar, because the problems that the people in Britain and the people in continental Europe are facing are very similar, right? It's the energy transition, and I don't think that Ed Miliband is just as mad as Robert Habeck in Germany. Like, there might be a difference in degree, but it's not really a difference in the goals that they have. Migration, the same thing, right? That too many people came into continental Europe and the UK over the last 10 to 15 years. Right? Nobody is saying it, neither, by the way, does the AfD. Nobody is saying it has to go down to zero, but I think 1 million as it was in Germany per year, or 300,000 up to 1 million as it was in the UK, is just too much.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, infrastructure cannot carry this and cannot sustain then such a growing population, or housing prices and healthcare. So to answer your question, either the so-called conservative parties adapt to this new reality, or they will be replaced by actual conservative parties. And I think that's the similarity. The CDU, the conservatives in Germany, what we see on the graph that you put on, right, that currently has 29%. Those 29% are sustained by the idea of those voters who think that if the CDU comes into government, they'll actually govern like the AfD, but I don't have to vote for them. If they don't do it, right, the next time this will be reversed. And I think the same thing is going to happen in the United Kingdom. If the Tories will not become a truly conservative party again, somebody will take their place. Maybe there will be an interregnum where you have a coalition government as you had it in the past in the UK. But at the end of the day, you'll go back probably to the 2-3 party system with just another party playing the role that the Tories played before.
Because, I mean, it happened a century ago. You know, the working class men got back from fighting in World War I and said, I'm done with the Liberal Party, and they started voting Labour. You know, perhaps this is the turning point. This is the straw that broke the camel's back.
And it's also the essence of democracy. I'm always so befuddled when people say, "Oh my God, this is a threat to democracy." No, that's the beauty of democracy.
Yes.
Because you do not have to overthrow the entire system, and yet can have significant change. I mean, forget about the moral arguments about democracy. That's the beauty of democracy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a threat to democracy if we have two parties that are exactly the same to vote for and no other options. That's the issue. It really annoys me when you constantly see the demonization of Trump in America and reform in the UK, with people on the left saying, oh, they're a threat to democracy, to make it look like these are terrifying people who are going to turn the place into dictatorships, rather than actually just making a good argument about why their policy is bad. I just think it's terrible debate. But that kind of narrative has led to people saying that people like Trump and people like Farage are essentially Nazis. You know, that label's stuck on everything. It's why you end up with, assassination attempts on people like Trump, because they're made out by the left. Rather than making an argument about why the policy is bad, they say, oh, these people are Nazi dictators who are a threat to democracy.
But I think it also shows you how smart the voters actually are. I think the general population, they are not as good as we are in, I guess, formulating political thoughts, because they have better things to do, right? They have jobs, they have children, they have families. They can just think and talk politics all day as we do. But they have a very good gut feeling. They have very good intuition. And I admire them. And I mean this sincerely, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in the United States, that people say, you know what, I don't care if the Hollywood stars, the media, the powers that be barrage me constantly and say, if you vote for this party or that person, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're a horrible being. They do it anyways. I mean, what a wonderful life sign of democracy. We need more of that. And I'm rooting for democracy for the very reason, because the so-called enemies of democracy are on the rise, because they're the exact opposites. They are a life sign. They show the vitality of our democracies. So I'll end on this positive note.
Yeah, and Ralph, your voice your mocking voice there, imitating these people that accuse people of being Nazis, you actually sounded a bit Arnie Schwarzenegger there.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
yeah, you did. I loved it. All right, Ralph, where can people find you on X? What's your handle?
Just if you the great luck of having an uncommon last name is that you can easily find me. So if you just type in Ralph Schoellhammer or Google Ralph Schoellhammer, it takes you automatically to all my social media. And I really hope that we can do this again in the future. This was a lot of fun.
No, I agree. I love
Come back,
talking to you. Definitely.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. We'll see what goes on in Germany, won't we? Because, it's not the end, put it that way. Even if the AfD don't come top of the pick, it's not the end. All right. Let's get back into that little grotto. Cheers, Ralph. Bye.
Thank you.
Well, very good, very good. I thought that was good. Apart
Great.
from my tech hiccups.
Yeah, it's great.
Right,
I
I'm
feel
going to
very
rattle through
energized.
some stories before Chloe's dog has an aneurysm.
He's
And
he is
is he all
fast
right?
asleep. He is
Well,
completely sedated.
It's Alex
Not
this time.
with
Alex keeps
drugs,
It's
messaging
just
me
me.
saying
I've got to
I'm
be
going to
up at
piss myself.
4:30 a.m.
Right,
Practice
I'll
is
just rattle through a couple of stories before, because we were with Ralph. No, it was very good, but we were with Ralph for a wee while. What do you make of the fact that most Britons want to bring back the death penalty? I'm especially interested in what Connie has to say, because I think actually they say 3 in 5
I'm
millennials.
so on the fence about it, I have to say.
Well,
Yeah,
I
you guys are
am a
going to have to make
millennial.
arguments to me and change my mind.
Well, so as a millennial, which Alex, you are as well, just about.
Yes.
You're at the top end of the millennial spectrum, and we, those born but in the early 1980s and the mid 1990s, make up the biggest population in Britain, which I didn't know. Power to the people, and 58% of us.
People used to have kids back then because you could afford a house.
Well, that's true. Well, we can't now because we're importing every Tom, Dick, and Harry to this country who doesn't want to be here in the first place. But, well, actually, I don't want to put you on the spot, Connie, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. But what's your view as someone who is even younger than a millennial?
My gut instinct is that this guy does not deserve to live, but
No.
I do think it is concerning, and I agree with what Will Kingston was saying on Saturday in response to Dr. Renee,
On GB
that we
News.
cannot argue this from a point of emotion as much as it is, nearly every piece of legislation you could argue is from emotion when it comes to issues like this and things that are just as serious. But I heard an American. He's a British lawyer, but he works in America for people on death row. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but I actually gasped when I heard it, the amount of innocent people that have been put to death in America by accident, like they got it wrong. And I don't know what sort of checks and balances we can put in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But then again, of course, the argument is when there is no doubt. But in those cases, I'm sure they thought at the time there was no doubt, otherwise that wouldn't have happened. So I think it is concerning. At the same time, also, I get the argument that he will actually suffer more by having to live out the rest of his life in prison. Hopefully he will have to live the rest of his life in prison. Obviously, we've already heard that he's suffered at the hands of other prisoners already, if that voice note that was being shared is accurate. So, like Chloe, yeah,
And that's
I'm
apparently
on the
fake news,
fence.
by the way.
Yes.
Oh,
About
was
him
it?
being beat up in prison.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's a shame.
Natural druid. He will never be beaten up in prison because he has the best security in the world, right? President
did
Trump
seem a bit
has
too
less
good to be
security
true.
than this man will have. The natural druid on YouTube says it's a huge waste of money putting people like this in jail, and I agree with those sentiments. I think that when it is so, I share your reservations around what if someone is proven innocent after the event? You can't bring people back from the dead, right? Once you've hung them, that's pretty much it. One, I think that hanging and flogging, public hangings, and seeing that people like this being hung in the middle of the streets, perhaps it'll bring back a little bit of bloody decorum to society. I think people like this do not deserve to live. The terror that he has inflicted upon these young girls for the rest of their lives, the ones that survived, I don't mean the ones that died, they will live with the scars, mental and physical, for the rest of their lives. I think he is sick and twisted and beyond rehabilitation. And in that respect, I don't think we have a duty to keep him alive. I think it is provable beyond reasonable doubt in the most positive way you can imagine, because there is video footage, dash cam footage on police cameras that they wear on their body armour. All of these things, it is provable that it was this man that did it, that he was the perpetrator, and that he said in a police car that he doesn't regret those girls being dead. It is provable beyond doubt that he did it. And therefore, I think people like this, when it is such unique, barbaric cases, and especially where they involve children, ought to die.
I think
I mean, it's
the
quite
other
a
thing.
good point you make there. Just about because you were talking about cases in the past, Connie, where they'd got it wrong and they'd killed people that were actually innocent. I guess it's important to take into account the fact that things are different in the modern age, and we have cameras everywhere. We have all of this CCTV. We have
That's
a
a
lot
good
more
point.
evidence. I'm still on the fence about this, but I think it's quite a good point that Darren makes there.
I think I just
sorry.
wanted to say as
Yeah.
well that I think the best moral argument I've heard against the death penalty is by reintroducing the death penalty, that might actually encourage people to commit worse crimes because they know they'll be put to death anyway, that they will do things on a mass scale. Like the
people that want
it's
to
been
meet
proven
their 72 versions, right? Because they want
They're
people
already
to
doing
die.
it. They're
They're
the
already
reality
doing
is
it
they're
anyway.
all-
You're not
they're
going to be
already
held
committing
hostage by these people.
They're already committing mass crimes and making this as drastic as they possibly can. So I don't think that unfortunately that argument holds any weight anymore, because I would have agreed with you perhaps 20 years ago, but not anymore, because we see people try
But
to bomb.
what about people who are not terrorists?
And on
but
top of
people
that,
That's
who
what
are
I mean. The less
look-
extreme
people who,
people will
right,
become more
someone
extreme.
like Axel Rieder is someone who is clearly very mentally ill, right? I'm not saying I don't know whether he is suicidal or not, but there will be a lot of people who are as mentally unwell as he is, who are suicidal, who might think, oh, good way to end my life. I can, commit this horrible violence that I've been dreaming of in my sick mind, and then I'll finally get the death for myself that I've wanted because I hate myself, right?
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
I don't think he
That's
does
a bit
hate himself,
worrying.
though. I think he hates everybody else. Because he did this not to... He would kill himself if he did hate himself. He's capable of murder, mass murder. Why wouldn't he just kill himself? This isn't a man that doesn't have the ability to make really abhorrent
No, but he
decisions.
might want both. Someone like this, they might be so sick in the head that they want both.
Well,
right? They might want to murder people, seek revenge on everyone they hate. Right. So, for example, someone who blames their horrible circumstances on their parents. Let's say they've got absolutely despise their parents. Say, you gave me an awful upbringing. Blah blah blah. Right? They might say, right, I hate myself. I want to kill myself. But I want to kill my parents that I absolutely despise first. So they murder their parents, and then they get killed as well. Right? They get everything that they want.
I want to move off this topic because I don't want to show his picture again, to be honest. I'm getting a bit sick of seeing his face, and I'm a bit worried about sort of some form of this guy becoming a martyr for really sick, twisted people. But I would argue, though, that I think that what's interesting is that these polls that keep coming out show that younger people are to the right of previous generations. I don't mean in the parties that they vote for, but in the views that they hold. They are more conservative-minded, and that is really interesting because it is a stereotypically conservative view that a life for a life, especially when it comes to children. So I am interested in those arguments, but perhaps that's something we can explore another time. I want to let Alex get onto this topic because it's something he can really stick his teeth into before he puts his head on his pillow, which is the idea of the Labour Party being utter hypocrites and crony hypocrites. This is everything that they accuse the Conservative Party of being. The firm that gifted Sadiq Khan free Taylor Swift tickets has won £45 million of City Hall contracts. The Mayor has defended attendance at the pop star's Wembley gig as work. Some people have it lucky. And admits accepting more VIP tickets to watch Liverpool games, etc., etc. Now, if you marry this, Alex, with the fact that Lord Ali, of course, gave loads of freebies to not just Sir Keir Starmer, mainly Sir Keir Starmer, but several other members of the cabinet, and you also put in the fact that Dale Vince, the Ecotricity CEO, has been given approval of a massive solar farm on prime agricultural land. Of course, Labour's policy is to attack farms and see the sale of these farms, and they've just approved the solar farm by a man who's given £5 million to the Labour Party. All of these things, I would suggest, really add up to conflict of interest and, not being too clean, which is exactly everything they could accuse the Conservative Party of being.
Yeah, well, it's the same as the establishment's party's been doing for decades, and the Tories are just as guilty, just as corrupt, just as crony. They have been before, and they will do it again if they're in power. I can guarantee you that. They gave and awarded billions of pounds of contracts when the Tories were in power to their friends and to their donors. So I don't want to let the Tories get off scot-free, because unfortunately they're riddled with it as well. The reality is that governments like Labour parties, before it got into power, pretended it was this moral sort of deity of a party, saying it would do better, it would hold government to transparency, to account. Sadiq Khan, of course, has been a prime example. If people have born and bred Londoners will know this, have lived in the city, have seen it get worse and worse progressively, very, very quickly. Will know that Labour were never going to be any good coming into power, because we've been experiencing it here for a very long period of time. But the reality is that this is the same old nonsense. It's handouts to your friends. And this goes back to the adage of power corrupting others. And it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump is such a breath of fresh air to America, because he cannot be bought. Nobody can buy Donald Trump. He's already wealthy. He doesn't need to be bought. His interest is in America. And I hate it when people get up on the soapbox about having wealthy people who are actually putting their name on the ballot, because I think those people are the less corruptible people, because they've made their money. They don't need to be given handouts. What we've got, unfortunately, is a bunch of ideologues who have never made any money because they've never been in business and never been successful in business, particularly on the Labour benches. Look at the front bench, for example. They're all politicians from the get-go, and then they see a bit of their mates getting contracts, and they go, "Well, maybe we'll have a backhand."
On that point, then, Alex, do any of you support what Dale Vince, the Labour donor, was saying? He's a massive net zero nut, by the way, and I think he's a very, very icky character. I don't like him at all. Total arse. But the fact of the matter is, he said, well, we can get around these allegations of conflict of interest, which one of our viewers, Dan, has just commented. He says, in the business world, conflict of interest is a big thing. How do government get away with it? Well, Dale Vince's solution for this was to have the taxpayer fund political parties, so that actually political parties don't have to rely on donor support to actually fund their operations.
I'm a bit unsure. I mean, I think it's important to show that there's a big contrast between the UK and the US. In the US, I think that is a huge problem, and that you cannot win an election in the US unless you have got loads of big firms giving you huge amounts of money who will want something in return. It very much stops you from doing what you might ordinarily do as a leader, because a lot of your legislation is just all pleasing all of these. So, for example, on the how we have 5 a day, and your information from the government on this is what you should eat. Like, the boards in America that decide the recommendations for what people should eat are all filled with the big businessmen from like Coca-Cola and whatnot sat on the boards, who just try to get them to, at the very least, dim down as far as possible the bad health effects of these things. And because they'll have funded campaigns and whatnot, they kind of have to do this stuff. So it's very different to the US. I think definitely
that's true,
it's an
but
issue in the UK. But I think
true, but it's also not true, because Donald Trump actually had less donors than Democrats, who got billions, and all the big tech companies really were against Trump. They were for Kamala up until they realized.
And she still ended up in debt.
And now you've got the health secretary being confirmed today, which is going to be Robert Kennedy, who is going to put an end to all of those sorts of things. So I think it's true, but it depends on, that's why I said you need that strong leader who can't be bought before the election. And I think that's the problem. It's politicians that are bought, not parties.
That's an interesting. Connie, where are you at?
I mean,
on
I
that?
think it's changing to a degree in that, for example, with social media, Trump was able to have some really
Yes.
viral moments for the cost of little to nothing, like that McDonald's stint, which, didn't really
That's
cost him anything,
And
going
maybe
far more viral than the paid adverts that Kamala Harris was putting out. So I think things are changing, but I think in the UK,
yeah.
it's nowhere near as bad. And I think we can have donors rather than the taxpayer having to foot the bill if there are appropriate safeguards and restrictions put in place. Maybe those need to be looked at and reviewed.
And ultimately, the trade unions fund the Labour Party, and then the trade unions get to hold the Labour Party to account in putting in really quite restrictive workers' rights policies that end up hampering the economy. And then the train driver's been a totally perfect one, where they hold the nation ransom. So maybe that would solve these issues as well. I don't know. Connie, sorry, that was to Connie.
Sorry. I'm really not sure about this, to be honest. I'm not. I understand it. Obviously, on the face of it, it's unfair that certain parties are going to have a massive advantage if they have huge donors, and typically it's going to be parties who are championing the economy and businesses and reducing taxes that are going to get donations from big companies that don't want to be taxed. But then again, like you say, left-wing parties are more likely going to have the donations from trade unions. But I really do not feel comfortable with the idea of the taxpayer funding parties having to. I don't know how that would necessarily work, whether they'd all get, I assume they'd all get an equal share, but that wouldn't stop the issue of donations. I don't know whether that would be like a one or the other option. Every party's funded by the taxpayer for their campaigns, as well as having their donations, or
I think
I'm really not sure what I
think it would mean that political parties would have to ration their voter reach in order to meet the whatever the donation is from the taxpayer, whatever the cap is rather from the taxpayer. Because let's be honest, it's not going to be a lot of money because we ain't got any, and the Treasury will want to penny pinch. So you'll end up seeing that certain voters can't be targeted because political parties don't have the money to do that, and I think that is fundamentally anti-democratic. So
Yeah. Would never get parties like Reform coming through the ranks because you wouldn't get funding.
Exactly.
So
yeah, they'd probably base it off the number of seats you got at the last election, right?
And
it's not like they're going. It's not like they're going to give the Greens the same amount of money as the Labour Party to campaign. They would have to give They would have to give more money to some party than others, and the only way for them to decide that would be they're not going to say, look at the polls. I highly doubt they would look at the polls that in real time and adjust the donations accordingly. I don't see how it would work well.
And let's be honest, the Labour Party would put in so many restrictions for access to this cash. You've got to not be a far right party. Well, we're all far right to Sir Keir Starmer, so none of us are getting elected. Right, I want to end and let Alex go to bed by playing this clip. So earlier I messaged, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Alex, but I haven't actually asked you if I can't say this, so here goes nothing. Earlier I messaged Alex and I said, Nigel Farage was really good on This Morning. I thought he was really good anyway. And I thought, the mainstream watching this channel, the ITV, and those who aren't at work and all the rest of it, watching ITV on a morning, I think they'll be quite impressed with his performance. And then Alex sent me this very awkward clip from earlier in the show in which ITV was celebrating Chinese New Year. And this is how it went down.
It's so Partridge.
So bizarre.
I mean, They clearly did that to just make it as awkward as possible for him.
Yeah.
And then some people were saying, oh, apparently the Metro newspaper posted today saying that loads of ITV viewers switched off, saying that it was a biased interview. Sorry, what? They've just tried to make him look like an arse on national
Idiot,
telly.
yeah. They'd
Look
never do that
there.
to Starmer, would they?
No,
I think it's
no, they'd
cute.
never have a Chinese dragon dancing behind Sakir, even though, you know, his
I
party's a
thought
bit
when
more
you
au
said
fait
you were
with
going
China.
to show me a clip from ITV that you were going to show us their Holocaust fuck up. Did you see that?
Oh no, yeah, no. I will do something tomorrow on that actually because I haven't done that yet.
Bad.
I will. It's so
Yeah,
bad.
so they said 6 million people died, including like disabled people, homosexuals, and people
Gays,
of other
yeah.
ethnic backgrounds. They forgot the word Jews,
Jew, which is a pretty
and
big
then they
part
did
of it.
they did a very short and awkward apology after all the backlash, but it was pretty pathetic. And it may have just been an honest mistake, but I have my suspicions.
Yeah, so do I. Anyway, my friends, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much to Dr. Ralph. And some people were asking for his name. If you do you know off the top of your head how you spell Schoellhammer? I'm challenging people
Schoellhammer,
now.
I think it's SCHOEL.
Mm-hmm.
OEL. And then hammer.
Okay, you'll find him.
Hammer.
Just put Dr. Ralph Unheard, and you'll find him.
Why didn't you
that
just
way.
show his Twitter on the screen, and then they can find him?
There he is. That's his handle. So if you want to follow Ralph, that's where you need to go. It's at RAPHFEL. And you'll find him there. Right, okay, and thank you very much to each of you as well. Apologies for the tech hiccups. I'm going to have to rebuild the entire show. Whoa, lucky me. Isn't that great?
All worked out just fine.
It'll all work out in the end, I'm sure. But whilst I'm rebuilding the show, you can actually support Reasoned and help us going by sending us a little donation. Or you can still help us out by liking, subscribing, and all of these other things. It really does help. Thank you very much to each of you and all your lovely comments. I've loved reading all of them. Schoellhammer, Steve says. Yes, Schoellhammer, that's it. All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night. Where's my end screen? Now we awkwardly wait 10 minutes for my end screen.